Crossover Thursday in the Steelers-Bengals rematch, and there's lots of playoff stakes on the line. We'll go over all that here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your hosts, Chris Carter and James Rapien of Locked On Steelers and Locked On Bengals. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday through Friday episodes, whether they're on the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Cincinnati Bengals. As always, we're bringing them to you every single day. And today's episode, as always, for Crossover Thursday is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app, use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. James, buddy, we're back on the we're back on the show together. It's been like a month or so since the last time we did this, and these teams have taken some different directions since then, but both have playoff stakes on the line. The Bengals need to win to have a hope to get into the playoffs. They would need some help after this game, but the Steelers, they are in the playoffs. But they need to win this game. One, if the Ravens somehow lose to the Browns, don't think that's happening. Then the Steelers could a Steelers win would win the division. But a Steelers win also guarantees them they would be no lower than the 5th seed, which would match them up with the Houston Texans, who I think we can all kind of agree are the weakest of the division leaders right now in the AFC.
Yeah, I think so. I think the Bengals and the Steelers would love to play the Texans in round one. Obviously, it's not possible for the Bengals, but the Steelers are playing for that. And by the way, I don't think anyone here in Cincinnati, some fans probably, but thought that Mike Tomlin would rest starters this week. Even if they know, no, why would you? I would much rather play Houston in Houston than have to go on the road and deal with Baltimore or go on the road really and play anyone else not named the Houston Texans. I think that they're clearly the worst playoff team in the AFC. I guess you could debate it if the Dolphins get in. I'm not going to debate it. I look at that and I'm like, man, Houston's playing at a really poor level. But you're right. I think Bengals wise, what a 180 it's been since December 1st when you were here in Cincinnati versus now with the Bengals going up to Pittsburgh.
It's such a 180. I mean, you look at these two teams since that game, the Bengals lost to the Steelers. They have won all 4 of their games since then, beating the Cowboys, Titans, Browns, and Broncos, handling their business to make it done. And it's kind of crazy. I don't know if you've been watching Hard Knocks. I've been watching all the episodes, and you go back to around the time when that Steelers game happened, I think the first episode, in fact, and you see Zach Taylor put up like, hey, our playoffs start now. We have to win these games to have a shot at the playoffs. And they lost that Steelers game, but they have won. They put themselves in the conversation for the playoffs, which, around that time after they lost that Steelers game, I marked the Bengals out. I was like, they're toast. There's no way they can get back in it. And listen, they could still win this game and not be in it, but they deserve credit for fighting back, not letting this season fall away and making this season come down to the last game.
Yeah, I think had you told me on December 1st at 5:00 Eastern time that, oh, hey, I know they just lost 44-38, but they're going to be in it till the end, I'd be like, get out of here. Get out of here. This game, this team, they can't beat anyone. They can't win close games. And they've done that. They went on the road and won 2 games after that. And then they came home and beat a division rival. And I get it. It's a bad Browns team. But then they beat a good Denver team. And I do think that that's a good team. And so it's like, all right, well, now you have a chance. And I think it's a mixture. It's, oh, man, I can't believe they have a chance despite how they played earlier in the year. And a lot of people have looked at it, including myself. And it's like, oh, well, if you hadn't lost by 6 to New England in week 1 or lost by 1 to the Ravens or lost in overtime to the Ravens at home when you had no business losing to that game or lose to the Steelers where you come out pretty lackluster early on in that game with your season on the line, especially on defense. And there's so many of those games, the Chargers game, there's so many of these 1-score games. And it's like, well, yeah, that's why you're 8-8. That's why they need help this week. Had they won any of those games, they wouldn't need help. They would just need to win and be in. Instead, they have to play their way in and get some help as well.
Yeah, they do need some help. The Steelers, here's the thing. I know that there's probably some people out there, why aren't the Steelers you're resting their guys, using this as a bye week. And I think a big part of people don't understand, the Steelers haven't played good football for almost a month. Since that Bengals win, they're 1-3. Their one win being over the Browns. They did have a rough stretch, sure. 3 games in 11 days. And whereas other teams had to go through that, no other teams had a high win total count in those opponents, like at the Eagles, at the Ravens, and then at home against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's a tough stretch for anybody to haul, and they did not handle that well. I think of importance for the Steelers in this game, as much as winning to get to Houston is, if they can win this game, they guarantee themselves Houston as long as the Ravens don't win, and then they would win the division. I think just important for the Steelers is getting back to playing your style of football, which you might not have seen this. Well, I think they did. They played their style of football against the Browns. They handled them on December 8th. But getting the ball to George Pickens, being a turnover, first defense, protecting the football, those are things the Steelers can do and have done several times. In fact, for most of this season. But I think it's imperative for this team, especially with a lot of the new pieces, including Russell Wilson, including some of the rookies that are starting on the offensive line. It's imperative for them to put that work out in front of themselves and say, hey, we can get back to this before they play the playoffs, whether it's the Texans, the Ravens, or whoever else.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a good point. I think this is going to be the most difficult. The Bengals have won 4 straight. If they make it 5 straight, certainly the most difficult of the 5 is this game against a team that clearly needs to figure out how to right the ship. They want to right the ship going into the playoffs, regardless of who they play. Obviously, you would much rather play the Texans. So if you win, you can put yourself in position to do that. And you want to go in with a little momentum. And that's why I think, and we talked about this a few minutes prior to recording, if you're the Bengals, you're going in with all the momentum if you can find your way in. But you have to overcome the biggest hurdle, which is going on the road, prime time. It's their 5th road primetime game this year. That's an NFL record. No team has had to do that. Go on the road 5 times in primetime. So you have to go on the road, division rival, AFC North road primetime games. Very rarely does the road team win. It's a weird thing in the AFC North that has happened. And so it's a tough environment, obviously. Stakes on the line for the Steelers. It's a really nice test, I think, to end the regular season or potentially end the season. And regardless of what happens around them, it's a big game for the Bengals. They can go into the offseason or into the playoffs with their 4th straight, winning record, which matters. I know Mike Tomlin talks about that all the time. Bengals winning, posting a winning record for 4 straight years. They've only done that once in team history. That's from 2011 to 2015 with Andy Dalton. To do it last year with losing Joe, and then to do it this year where they were 4-8, I do think that would matter. So yeah, we'll see if they can do that. Obviously, playoffs are on the line, but that mark is a big one as well.
Absolutely. I want to get to the Bengals offense and the Steelers defense and how those two will counteract in this game like they did in the last game. Of course, the Bengals, they got multiple playmakers, but the 2 guys that everyone's looking at, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, on some legendary paces right now. We'll get to both of them next here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, James Rapien, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, what I'm reminding you, this show is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending several concerts last year. The energy, the excitement, they're unforgettable, and you can get all those experiences right now with Gametime, the best place to get tickets for all your favorite events. And they have a great new feature called Gametime Picks. This feature filters out all the fluff so that to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Whether you're looking for which bands are coming to town for the next big concert, or you want to get tickets for the next big game, Steelers, Bengals, playoffs, or otherwise, Gametime is the best place to find those tickets. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets to all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Plus, the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less somewhere else, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Back here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, James Rapien of Locked On Bengals. James, let's talk about this Bengals offense real quick. And as Mike Tomlin said, Joe Burrow is playing like an MVP. And he is. You look at the numbers right now. Most completions, most attempts, most yards, most touchdowns, highest yards per game. Like just across the board, he has been phenomenal. And only 8 interceptions in that span. You look at the next 4 highest passers as far as guys that are up in yardage. They have 15 interceptions, 12 interceptions, 15 interceptions, 10 interceptions. It's remarkable what Joe Burrow's done. And you look at the team around Joe. And yes, Jamar Chase, he's pushing for the Triple Crown right now. He's amazing, and that adds to it. But like, this team highly depends on those two specifically, and T. Higgins too. He's awesome. But like, they are so heavily leaning on these guys, and it's ridiculous how much that has pulled them through the fire when you have such a bad offensive line that gives up pressures, and it's forced Joe Burrow to show everyone that he's got wheels and he can dodge all the pressure. And then you have a defense that can't consistently stop anybody to the point where, you know, everyone was wondering, why aren't you just running out the clock and kicking the field goal against the Broncos? Because they can give up a drive like that. I'm just thoroughly impressed by how Burrow and Chase and this offense have made this team work.
Yeah, they've found a way, it seems like, each and every week to keep the Bengals in games. That's why there's been so many one-score games. The Bengals have played 16 games so far. 10 have been decided by one score. They're 3-7 in those 10. One of those losses coming to the Steelers, 44-38 earlier. Well, I was going to say earlier this month, but we're in January now. So you get the point, though. So, yeah, it's wild how it bleeds together in holiday week. But, yeah, I think you look at it, and Joe is playing the best ball of his career. The way he's seeing it, the way he's extending plays, the way he's holding on to it. And it's led to some fumbles. It's led to some turnovers because he's asked to do so much. I've been asked about Joe Burrow and the MVP race and all of those things. And I get it. He's not going to win it, and he won't. It'll be Lamar. It'll be Josh Allen. And both of those guys deserve it. But when you look at value, and Steelers listeners will certainly understand this and be aware of this. Where were the Bengals 10 years ago? Well, They were really good with Andy Dalton. Did you ever feel like this about them, though?
No.
Did it ever, or in 2017, 2018, 2019?
Maybe Carson Palmer, Chad Johnson days. Maybe. But this is another level of that even.
Yeah, because Burrow's better than Palmer ever has already broke a lot of Palmer's marks.
Yes.
And I'm the biggest Chad fan ever. Grew up watching him.
Mm-hmm.
Jamar Chase is a better player than Chad Johnson. And so when you have these two guys, because they do it in huge moments on the line, clutch situations, like the game they lost in Baltimore, Thursday Night Football, it was Joe and Jamar saying, nah, get on our back.
Yep.
And they did. I mean, they scored 3 touchdowns and Joe found Jamar. I mean, it's just insane. And they did come up short. And it's because this team is flawed. But man, are they playing at such a high level. And so, yeah, if you're any opponent preparing for the Bengals, it starts with 9, then you go right to 1, and then you go to 1, and you go right back to 9. That's where it begins and ends for sure.
And I think the Steelers' key is to say, like, hey, it's kind of like when you're playing a really good basketball player who you know is going to score. They're going to get theirs. Like these guys, they're going to score. Like in the last game, they had a touchdown, but your job is to make sure that you do other things so well that they can't be the part that dominates the game. For example, Jamar Chase, 6 catches on 9 targets last time, 86 yards and a touchdown. Good numbers, but not take over the game numbers. And that was the key. And you go back and you look at the game. What made the difference for the Steelers defense? They got a pick and 2 forced fumbles on Joe Burrow in that game. They won the turnover battle 3-1. And Mike Tomlin brought it up in his Monday press conference this week. He said, like, hey, they had a pick 6. We had the defensive score to answer, and we won by a possession. That's how important those things are. Now, I think the big thing for the Steelers defense in trying to counter this is they have not been that turnover team for some time now. They've lost the turnover battle in all 3 of their losses to the Chiefs, Ravens, and Eagles in recent weeks. And part of it's been the pass rush hasn't been there at times. But even when the pass rush has been there, for example, they forced a fumble on Lamar Jackson. They have forced 4 straight fumbles without a recovery in situations, in moments that normally that can flip the game. They dropped an interception last week on Patrick Mahomes. They have to capitalize on those opportunities. It's a big part of who they've been, and it's a big part of who they haven't been in this losing streak. And I think that's where I've been drawing this parallel throughout the week. Last year, the Steelers, granted, a different Bengals team with Jake Browning, but they were a reeling Steelers team. Everyone wondering, is this team about to fall off a cliff? Because they had just lost 3 straight, granted to 3 bad teams, not 3 really good teams. And all of a sudden, they get the Bengals at home, primetime game, and Mason Rudolph just brings them alive. They find confidence. They win 3 straight to go to the playoffs. This time around, they're playing a Joe Burrow, who's on another level. They're playing a healthier Bengals team, in a lot of regards, and a Bengals team that's hungry, looking for a win to keep their playoff hopes alive, while the Steelers are in the playoffs. And I think this is a chance for the Steelers, like last year, to set their record straight and be like, hey, let's get back to what we do well. And if they can find that in this game, that could be the thing that catapults them into the playoffs and gives them a better chance to play. Because if they play like they did the last 3 weeks, they'll lose to the Bengals, they'll lose to whoever they get in the first round. But if they play like they did for most of this season, like their wins against the Bengals, against the Commanders, against the Ravens the first time, they can be a team that can be dangerous. Just like I think a lot of teams are looking at the Bengals right now saying, hey, like the Chiefs in Buffalo, I think they'd rather not see the Bengals playing at their best in the postseason right now.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think as far as, and you mentioned health, and they are healthy in a lot of key areas, but the spot that I look at, and it might define the game, because the way to contain Joe and Jamar is to do what? Be able to guard Jamar enough, guard T enough, and get pressure on Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Amarius Mims has a club on his right hand. He's dealing with a broken right hand. He's their starting right tackle. Mm-hmm. Orlando Brown Jr. is going to start. I don't know if Amarius will, but Orlando Brown Jr. is going to start dealing with a broken fibula in 2 spots. I've known about it for quite some time. Orlando revealed it to everyone the other day after the game against the Broncos. And so how close to 100% will he be? Will they have to help on the other side if Devin Cochran starts at right tackle? And that's who would start if Amarius can't play. And if Amarius can play, great. That sounds great. But how much help will you have to give him, considering he is probably going to have a club on his right hand and have to deal with TJ Watt? Like, that's a lot. And not just Watt, but Herbig and all of those guys that the Steelers can throw at this pass first Bengals offense. That's where this game will be won and lost. It is that in that December 1st game, it was the Burrow fumbles. It just kind of broke things open. It just changed things. Well, why did he fumble? Because of the pressure, because of the ability to get Joe moving, but contain him and not give up those explosive plays at times into forced turnovers. If you can do that, well, then you can live with a touchdown for Jamar or a big play to T. You can live with that because you're forcing turnovers as well. So I do think that a big change since then has been the Bengals' ability to force turnovers. They've forced 10 turnovers.
Yes, they have.
In the past 3 games. Jermaine Pratt was able to get an interception the other night. That was a game-changing play against the Denver Broncos. They'll need to do that and continue that. Russell Wilson's had a couple of fumbles. They're going to have to find a way to do exactly what the Steelers did to them on December 1st this week if they're going to win on Saturday night.
Well, that's a perfect transition because I want to talk about the Steelers offense versus the Bengals defense, because all year long, people have been talking about the Bengals defense is terrible. It's bad. When the Steelers put up points against them, it's like, it doesn't matter. The Bengals defense is bad. Like you said, and Mike Tomlin noted that as well on Monday, the Bengals have been on a turnover tear, and the Steelers, they've been giving up the ball a little too much, not a little too much, way too much in the past few games. I want to talk about how those two things could collide next here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, James Rapien, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, remind you, this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. If you love betting on players to score a touchdown, they got those options. How many points each team will score? Guess what? They got that too. And right now, Steelers-Bengals, at this point of the week that we're recording the show, the Steelers are just 1.5-point home underdogs to the Bengals early in the week. The Bengals money line set at -130. The Steelers money line set at +110 with the over-under set at 48.5. Where will you put your money? Make sure you do so on FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. And remember, you can start the season with a big return. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets for new customers. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on Crossover Thursday, here on the Locked On Podcast Network, Chris Carter, James Rapien, Locked On Steelers, Locked On Bengals. All right, James, the big thing that happened in the last game was the Steelers' offense. I mean, there were a lot of big things. It was a crazy game. But the Steelers' offense was humming. They scored 44 points, so they really scored 37, and the defense got a return a touchdown. But Russell Wilson threw 3 touchdowns, threw for over 400 yards. The Steelers were able to get Najee Harris going for 4.7 yards per carry on the game. They were able to get things going, and a lot of it, and it's funny, if you watch the Hard Knocks episode where the Steelers played the Ravens, I love the way the Ravens staff talked about Russell Wilson. He said, this guy is either layups or 3-pointers. He goes for the deep ball or he checks it down underneath. And those check downs underneath were a big part of what got the Steelers offense going in tough moments against the Bengals. How have the Bengals adapted since then to be better in those types of moments?
One of the iconic lines of the season after the game, and I've made fun of him virtually on every single episode of Locked On Bengals, was afterwards. Jermaine Pratt said, quick game, just a lot of quick game. Like quick game has never been invented before. Like they had never seen it. And like you didn't know how to defend it. Because yes, the Steelers relied on the quick game, and the quick game sliced and diced their way. I'm not knocking the Steelers. I mean, Russell Wilson threw for 414 yards with quick game. His long was 43, and it's because they didn't do the basic things, the simple things. Tackle, find ways to be in the right spot. And when you're in the right spot, when you do tackle, what happens? Well, teams make a mistake, even with quick game. Yep. And we've seen that in recent weeks. This defense has been more disciplined. They still gave up some big plays to Bo Nix. We saw that on Saturday night. But they've been a little more opportunistic. They've been in the right spot. They've tackled better, not the best, but better. And that's what you need to do, is take away the downfield stuff for George Pickens. And you certainly don't want Calvin Austin to get a big one. And I saw him in his college days going up against the University of Cincinnati. So I'm very familiar with what he can do. Don't give up the deep ball, and then make tackles, do the discipline stuff. We'll see if Lou Anarumo can have this defense ready. One of their worst performances of the season was that first matchup against Pittsburgh, no doubt in my mind. And so we'll see if they can rebound.
And that has to be fresh in their minds too, because at the same time, that was the thing. If you go back to the start of the season, Zach Taylor putting up on the board, on Hard Knocks, saying like, hey, playoffs start here. And that was the first part of that. They didn't get the job done. But then after that, against the Cowboys, they forced 2 turnovers in a close game. They find a way to pull out that win. Then against the Titans, they forced 6 turnovers against the Titans, then 3 against the Browns. And then you get a big one. I mean, here's the other thing. The timeliness of it is so huge. Because that interception they got on Bo Nix, they don't get that interception, they might lose before they even get to overtime, against the Broncos. And then we're not even talking about this game right now. You and I are just going to be like, well, it's probably going to be Jake Browning or Jamar Chase. He's going to probably rest or something like that. But because the defense has been timely with some of these turnovers, they found their way through a lot of these games of late, and they found some rhythm. It's going to be up to the Steelers to protect the football because, on the flip side of things, the Steelers, they haven't protected the football of late, and they were a team that was protecting the football pretty well. When you looked at it, they were at worst they gave up a turnover in a game, and it was something kind of wonky that happened. But you look against the Ravens, they gave up 2 turnovers. Russell Wilson fumbled in the red zone trying to get a touchdown, then threw a pick 6 that basically closed out the game. You get the Chiefs, you get a Russell Wilson interception where he just threw an ill-advised pass, and then Pat Freiermuth fumbling on a reception. The Steelers have to get back to limiting those and creating more on themselves. Their game against the Chiefs was their first since September 29th that they have not forced a turnover. That's going to be the key here, is the Steelers winning the turnover battle again. But we talked about the defensive side. For the offense, they got to protect the ball, and they have to find ways, I think, to get the ball to other guys, because I do think the Ravens, the Bengals are going to come out looking for what we talked about the Steelers did last time, hitting the running backs, hitting Jaylen Warren, Najee Harris short, and letting them get 8 yards. This has to be the week where, you go back to last year when they played the Bengals the first time. Steelers killed the Bengals with Pat Freiermuth, just hitting them up all the way up down the field. I think that's still Pat Freiermuth's most total yards in the game. And then the second time around, They don't even target him once. And they even said, we used him as a decoy. That has to be part of the plan this week, is to force the Bengals to say, hey, here's our running back. You going to come get him this time? And if they do, be prepared to take advantage of it. And that's where Russell Wilson has to show he's a veteran a veteran quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, it's a huge storyline in this game is how to do that. And I think keys wise, if we're going to do some keys, for the Bengals, I'll start here. It obviously begins and ends with number 9, protecting 9. Give Joe Burrow enough time, and don't let TJ Watt wreck the game. It starts there. So that's number 1, protect 9. Number 2 is this defense. I don't care if it's quick game. I don't care if it's deep. I don't care if it's home runs. I don't care if it's I don't care what it is. I don't care what analogy either. But if Russell Wilson is throwing the football, be disciplined and be where you need to be, and then go make the play. And it's such a simple thing. I know it's harder, much easier said than done, but it's such a simple thing that they've gotten wrong a lot this year. And so that's a key. Part of that discipline, you think back, the Bengals had a chance to get the ball back. The defense in that game on December 1st, they give up a little read option play to Justin Fields for 7 yards on 3rd and 4, where he just fakes it, and you or me could have gotten the first down because no one was out there. They bit. That can't happen. You have to be disciplined. And so that is key number 2. And then number 3 for me is going to be, because I especially think with this Steelers pass rush, and we saw it against the Broncos as well, at times, even though T. Higgins had 3 touchdowns, Jamar Chase had over 100 yards. Like, those guys were huge, but so was Mike Gesicki. So was Chase Brown. So were these other weapons that they have. And when you have a team like the Steelers and a pass rush like the Steelers have, guess what? They're going to get after you a bit. And so you need more than option A and option B. You need C, D, E, F. And so whether it's Andre Yosevich, Mike Gesicki, all these other guys, they're going to have to step up and make some plays in the passing game as well.
No, I agree. Those are some fine keys there. I'll give 3 for the Steelers as well. 1, you got to limit the busted coverages. That's been another factor in these 3 losses. They have become, again, the characteristic things that built their season has become uncharacteristic things that have kind of ruined their chance to win the division in these last 3 games. The Steelers just leaving guys wide open, and you can go look at Sean Elliott's clip where he used some colorful language to describe that on our YouTube Shorts page for Locked On Steelers. But they're just being unaccountable in certain situations that have left guys, even guys like Travis Kelce, wide open in bad spots. And it's not that it's anything extra complicated. They haven't done what they were doing for most of this season, which, like, hey, even in the Bengals game, when Joe Burrow's getting his yards, you're going to make him have to be accurate into tight coverages. But when you allow people to get open looks, and it ruins the chance for the pass rush to get home. And that's where the second key comes into play. The pass rush has to get home. It wasn't as effective against the Chiefs. Granted, Patrick Mahomes is a magician sometimes. We get it. But Joe Burrow has been very magician-like this year. You got to be prepared for not only to get pressure, but to contain his escape lanes and to make sure that you get him down for some of those turnovers that you did, like you did last time against this really good quarterback. And in that way, those 2 components play together. But the last key here for me is Russell Wilson. He has to get back to playing at the level of being the leader that he was for most of the season for the Steelers when he'd been in there. You look at how he turned on against the Jets, some of the clutch plays he had to get the Giants, the clutch play against the Commanders. Even though he didn't get a touchdown in the win over the Ravens, he had some clutch throws in that game. And then especially against the Bengals and Browns in those 2 wins. He has been such a key player with his ability to keep his head in the game, make good decisions, counter what defenses are doing. But the last 3 weeks, he hasn't done that as much. I give him a pass on the Eagles because they only had 2 possessions in the second half that game. But against the Ravens, against the Chiefs, I think those have been his worst games of the season. But he's a guy who I've seen in his time with Seattle, Denver, and Pittsburgh. He can go from really bad to really good. And that has to happen this week for Russell Wilson. If it does, and those other 2 things happen, I think it gives the Steelers the best chance. But I think what both of our points are here is these are 2 hungry teams looking for a win with a lot of talent. And this is going to be, I think, another big AFC North fight that Hard Knocks is going to love doing the widescreen when they bring it down low and they focus in and they start playing the hype up music as Joe Burrow walks into Acrisure Stadium. I think it's going to be a fun one, and I'm really excited to be able to cover this game. Granted, I wish it was a Sunday 1 p.m. game.
Yeah, I'm with you, brother. I'm with you right there all day long. Yeah, but it's Saturday night football. It's 2 AFC North rivals. It's a big one, and it should be fun. I know the environment's going to be crazy. I think the Bengals are up for the task of playing well in that environment, and I think the Steelers are going to be hungry, like you said, and they have a lot on the line as well. And so, dare I say it? Here's my prediction.
Okay.
It will be another Bengals one-score game. I think it will go down to the wire again. They've played 10 of them this year. I think it will be 11 of 17 games that are decided by one score.
Lots of stress there. Get his full prediction in Friday's episode of Locked On Bengals, just like you get my full prediction in Friday's episode of Locked On Steelers. You can do all of that on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. James, thanks as always for doing a great crossover Thursday with me. It's always fun to do that with you, sir. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At James Rapien on Twitter/X. And of course, it's the Locked On Bengals podcast. So wherever you get your podcasts. And then if you want to read my work as well, you can at bengalstalk.com.
Absolutely. He's James Rapien. I'm Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all the social medias. Same handle all the time. At Carter Critiques. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, where I not only cover Steelers, I also cover Pitt football and basketball. And you can catch my show just like you catch James's show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday through Friday Steelers or Bengals episodes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Tune in tomorrow for your favorite team's final episode heading into the Saturday night game. It'll be right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.